Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are tackling a beast of a topic.
We really are.
It's the kind of subject that usually makes medical students sweat, not because the concepts are impossible, but just the sheer volume is massive. We're talking about the gram-negative rods of the enteric tract.
Yeah, and it's often dismissed as just, the stomach bug chapter, but that really undersells it. We're looking at chapter 12 of Lippincott Illustrated Reviews, Microbiology, and frankly, this is the bread and butter of hospital medicine. You are going to see these organisms constantly in your career.
Exactly. And the mission for this deep dive is pretty specific. We're treating this like a last-minute lecture.
I like that.
The vibe, the exam is tomorrow morning, you're staring at charts and flow sheets, and you need to figure out how to keep E. coli, Salmonella, and Shigella straight in your head without, losing your mind.
Perfect.
So we're going to walk through the chapter, decode the figures, and really highlight the high-yield stuff you actually need to know.
I love that approach because when you first open chapter 12, it looks like just an alphabet soup of acronyms.
It does.
But there is a very strict logic to how these bugs are organized. And if you can lock in that logic, the clinical questions, they essentially answer themselves.
So let's start with that 30,000-foot view. We're dealing with this huge family called Enterobacteriaceae, plus a few cousins. What's the common denominator here?
Okay, so the big unifier is that they are all gram-negative rods. That means they have that complex outer membrane, and buried in that membrane is lipopolysaccharide, or LPS. You'll hear this called endotoxin.
Right, endotoxin.
And it doesn't matter if it's E. coli or a Salmonella. If that gets into the bloodstream, the LPS triggers a massive immune response, fever, shock, the works.
So they all carry a potential, like a bomb in their cell wall. But how do we tell them apart in the lab? I'm looking at figure 12.1 in the text, and it looks like a decision tree.
It is, and I want everyone visualizing this tree because it is your roadmap for the whole deep dive. The first fork in that road is crucial. It comes down to one question. Can this bacteria eat sugar? Specifically, can it ferment lactose?
This is the McConkey-Agar test, right?
Spot on. McConkey-Agar is differential. If a bug ferments lactose, it produces acid, and the colony turns this bright, hot pink. Those are your lactose fermenters.
So pink means E. coli or Klebsiella.
Exactly. The big names there are Escherichia coli, Klebsiella, and Enterobacter. If you see pink colonies on McConkey, you're dealing with one of those.
And if they stay colorless, what does that mean?
Then they are non-lactose fermenters, and that's usually the bad news group. Salmonella, Shigella, Proteus.
No.
Just knowing that color change pink versus colorless, honestly, it answers about 20% of board questions right off the bat.
Then you've got that third group off to the side in the diagram, the weird shapes, the curved and spiral rods.
Right. Campylobacter, Helicobacter, and Vibrio. They don't play by the standard brick-shaped rod rules, so they get their own section. We'll get to them.
Okay. So let's zoom in on the heavyweight champion of this chapter first. Section 1. Escherichia coli. Or, just E. coli. It feels like this bacteria has an identity crisis. Most of the time, it's a harmless roommate in our gut, but then sometimes it's a killer.
It's the perfect example of how flexible bacterial genetics are. Your normal flora E. coli is totally fine, but if it picks up a virulence plasmid, just a little extra ring of DNA, it puts on a mask and becomes a pathogen.
So the text breaks down its uniform in figure 12.2. We see these serotypes like O157.H7. I feel like people just memorize that string of numbers but don't actually know what it stands for. Can you break down the O, H, and K antigens?
Absolutely. Think of it as a coordinate system for the bacteria's body parts. The O antigen is the somatic antigen. That's the cell wall, the outer layer attached to the LPS.
Like, okay, O for outer.
Then the H antigen refers to the flagella.
I always remember H for high speed. If it has an H, it can move.
That is a great hook. Only the modal strains have the H antigen, and then you have the K antigen, which stands for the capsule, from the German word capsule.
K for covering, like a covering.
Exactly. So when you see O157.H7, you're literally just describing body type 157, flagella type 7. It's just an ID card for serotyping during outbreaks.
Let's get into the clinical mess that is the alphabet soup of E. coli diarrhea. Figure 12.3 lists 5 different types. ETEC, EPEC, EHEC. It's so easy to get these twisted.
It really is.
Let's try to give the listener a distinct hook for each one. Start with ETEC.
ETEC stands for enterotoxigenic E. coli. The hook here is traveler's diarrhea.
Right.
This is the classic scenario.
Right.
You're on vacation, you drink the tap water, and suddenly you can't leave the bathroom.
And what's the mechanism? The text says it involves 2 toxins.
Yes, and this is super high yield. It produces a heat labile toxin, LT, and a heat stable toxin, HET.
Yeah.
And the text points out something fascinating. The heat labile toxin works exactly like cholera toxin.
Wow.
It cranks up CMP levels in your gut cells.
And the heat-stable one affects cGMP.
Correct. So when both cGMP and cGMP go up, your gut lining just gets confused. It dumps chloride ions and water into the lumen.
And you get this massive watery diarrhea.
Massive. But notice what I didn't say. I didn't say inflammation and I didn't say blood.
Right, the gut wall is still intact. It's just leaking water.
Precisely. So ETEC is watery, super inconvenient, but usually self-limiting. Fluid replacement is usually all you need.
Okay, so contrast that with the next one, EPEC, enteropathogenic.
Think P for pediatrics. This is a huge cause of diarrhea in infants, particularly in developing nations. The mechanism here is totally different. It's structural.
What do you mean?
The bacteria use a molecular syringe, a type 3 secretion system, to inject proteins directly into the host cell.
It physically changes the cell.
It completely remodels the cell's skeleton. It creates this little pedestal that the bacteria sits on, and it just destroys the microvilli around it. The text calls these attaching and effacing lesions.
So if you destroy the microvilli, you can't absorb food.
And you get malabsorptive watery diarrhea, but again, usually not bloody.
Okay, now we have to talk about the one that scares everyone. EHEC, enterohemorrhagic E. coli.
This is the 0157 but H7 strain we mentioned. The key word is hemorrhagic. We are talking about frank, bloody diarrhea.
Right.
And interestingly, the text notes that unlike Shigella or Salmonella, these patients often have no fever or a very low one.
The source here is usually undercooked beef, right? Like fast food burgers?
Historically, yes, cattle are the reservoir. But we've seen outbreaks from spinach and even cookie dough. The mechanism, though, is what makes it so deadly. It produces Shigella-like toxins.
Shigella-like implies it stole a trick from Shigella.
It did. It acquired the gene from a bacteriophage. This toxin just stops protein synthesis in your cells. It kills them.
Which leads to the bloody lining in the colon.
Yes, but the real danger is when that toxin hits the kidneys.
This is the HUS complication, hemolytic uremic syndrome.
It is a terrifying triad: acute renal failure, hemolytic anemia, so it's breaking up red blood cells, and thrombocytopenia, which is low platelets. It just shreds the kidneys, especially in children.
And here's the part that, it blows my mind every time I read it. The treatment.
It is so counterintuitive. Do not give antibiotics.
You have a bacterial infection, but you don't treat with antibiotics. Why?
Because killing the bacteria causes a massive release of the preformed toxin. You literally flood the system with the very poison that causes the kidney failure.
Wow.
The text is explicit. Antibiotics can potentiate HUS. You treat with supportive care fluids, dialysis if needed.
That is a critical takeaway. If you suspect EHEC, hold the Cipro.
It might just save the patient's kidneys.
Okay, quickly rounding out the E. coli list, we have EIEC and EATC.
EIEC is enteroinvasive. It behaves almost exactly like Shigella. It invades the epithelial cells, causing dysentery, so bloody stool with fever. And EAEC is enteroaggregative. They stack up on the cells like stacked bricks and cause a persistent diarrhea, especially in HIV patients.
Before we leave E. coli, we should mention it's not just a gut bug. It's versatile.
Oh, yeah. It's the #1 cause of urinary tract infections. It uses these things called P. fimbriae to hold onto the bladder wall so it doesn't get peed out.
Smart.
And it's a major cause of neonatal meningitis.
Is that linked to a specific antigen?
The K1 capsule. And here is a piece of trivia the text highlights. The K1 capsule is chemically identical to the capsule of Neisseria meningitidis. It's basically wearing a disguise that helps it evade the baby's brand new immune system.
That is sneaky. Okay, let's cross the line on our flowchart. Section 2, the non-lactose fermenters. We're leaving the pink colonies and looking at the colorless ones, Salmonella and Shigella.
Let's start with Salmonella. Most people associate this with food poisoning, raw eggs, poultry, or the text specifically warns about pet turtles.
Wait, turtles are a vector?
Reptiles carry it naturally, yeah. That form is Salmonella enterica, usually Cerobar's enteritis or typhimurium. It causes gastroenteritis.
So nausea, vomiting, diarrhea.
Right. It's miserable, but it stays in the gut.
But there is a darker cousin, Salmonella typhi.
This causes typhoid fever or enteric fever. And the pathogenesis here is radically different. Take a look at figure 12.6.
Okay, it shows the bacteria entering the M cells in the gut, but then they get eaten by macrophages.
Usually being eaten by a macrophage is a death sentence for a bacterium, but Salmonella typhi loves it. It replicates inside the macrophage.
No way.
It uses the immune system as a taxi service to spread to the liver, spleen, and bone marrow.
So this is a systemic infection.
Yes. You get high fever, headache, abdominal tenderness, and sometimes these row spots on the chest. And even after you recover, the bacteria can just hide out in your gallbladder.
That's the Typhoid Mary scenario.
Exactly. She was a cook who was a chronic carrier, shedding bacteria into the food she prepared, infecting dozens of people while feeling perfectly fine herself.
Wow. Now, how does Shigella compare? Because clinically, they can both present with bloody stool.
The big difference is the infectious dose. To get Salmonella, you need to eat a burger that's teeming with millions of bacteria because your stomach acid will kill most of them. Shigella. The text says you only need 10 to 100 organisms.
10. That's it?
10. It is extremely acid resistant.
That is frighteningly efficient.
It makes it wildly contagious in daycare centers or nursing homes. Person-to-person spread is rampant. It causes shigellosis or bacillary dysentery. You aren't just having diarrhea, you are passing stools of blood and mucus.
The current jelly stools.
That's the classic description. And the mechanism is just aggressive. They don't just swim around.
What do they do?
No, they breach the colon wall. And figure 12.11 shows this incredible sort of sci-fi mechanism. Once they're inside a cell, they hijack the host's the structural support of the cell. They polymerize it behind them to form a tail that acts like a rocket.
So they shoot themselves from one cell directly into the next.
Without ever going outside. They stay hidden from antibodies. It's brilliant and destructive. And of course, S. dysenteriae type 1 produces that Shigella toxin we mentioned, so HUS is a risk here too.
Okay, we've done the enterics. Let's shift shapes. Section 3, the curved and spiral rods. We have Campylobacter, Vibrio, and Helicobacter. Let's start with Campylobacter.
Campylobacter jejuni. Under a microscope, these look like seagull wings, little curved S shapes. Figure 12.8 shows that they have this darting motility.
Is this another foodborne one?
Huge. It's actually one of the most common causes of bacterial diarrhea in the U.S. The culprit is almost always undercooked poultry.
But the text makes a distinction about the timing, doesn't it?
Right. If you eat bad potato salad with Staph aureus, you are puking in 4 hours. That's a preformed toxin. Campylobacter is an infection. You swallow the bugs, they have to multiply, they have to invade. So the illness starts 2 to 5 days later.
So it's tough to trace it back to the meal that caused it.
Very difficult. And there is a specific autoimmune risk here.
Guillain-Barré syndrome.
Exactly. About 1 in 1,000 cases triggers this. The antibodies you make against the Campylobacter accidentally attack the coating on your own nerves.
And it causes ascending paralysis.
It does. It's rare, but it is the classic board association.
Moving to Vibrio, specifically Vibrio cholerae. This is a history-shaping pathogen.
It is. Short, curved rods with a single polar flagellum. It lives in water, usually brackish or salt water. We see outbreaks after natural disasters where sewage mixes with drinking water, like we saw in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake.
We touched on the CAMP mechanism earlier with E-Tech, but cholera is the absolute master of this. Figure 12.3 and maps it out in detail. Walk us through the AB toxin.
It's elegant in a really scary way. The B subunit stands for binding. It latches onto the gut cell surface.
Okay, it's the anchor.
It's the anchor. That lets the A subunit, the active part, slip inside. Once inside, the A subunit finds a G protein.
The traffic signals of the cell.
Perfect analogy. It chemically modifies the G protein ADP ribosylation is the term you will see on the test, so that it gets stuck in the on-end position.
So it's just screaming, go, go, go.
It screams at an enzyme called adenyl cyclase to just make CAMP, and it never stops.
The switch is broken.
Completely broken. CMP floods the cell, and the cell just dumps electrolytes and water until the patient is literally drying out. We are talking liters of fluid loss per hour.
That's where you get rice water stools.
Yes, it looks like water that rice has been boiling in cloudy with flecks of mucus.
And the treatment, I assume antibiotics help?
They're secondary. You can treat cholera without a single pill if you just replace the fluid fast enough. Hydration is life or death.
Wow.
Antibiotics like doxycycline just shorten the duration and reduce shedding.
Got it. Last of the spirals. Helicobacter pylori. The ulcer bug.
This is a fascinating story of adaptation. I mean, the stomach is a vat of acid. Nothing should live there.
So how does it not dissolve?
It carries its own chemistry set. It produces a massive amount of an enzyme called urease. Urease breaks down urea into ammonia and CO2.
And ammonia is basic.
So the bacteria surrounds itself with this little cloud of neutralizing ammonia.
A personalized force field against acid.
Exactly. But that ammonia, along with other toxins, it destroys the mucus layer protecting the stomach wall. The acid starts eating the tissue, and you get ulcers. The text notes it's present in almost 100% of duodenal ulcers.
And this is the only bacterium labeled as a class 1 carcinogen.
Yes. Chronic inflammation from H. pylori is a major risk factor for gastric cancer and a specific lymphoma called maltoma.
So we treat it aggressively.
We have to. We use triple therapy. It's usually a proton pump inhibitor to lower the acid, plus 2 different antibiotics to clear the bug.
Okay, we were in the home stretch, section 4, the mimic and the opportunists.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Yersinia.
Yersinia enterocolytica. You can get this from contaminated pork, milk, or, and this is an odd one, puppy feces. And it grows well in the cold, so refrigeration doesn't stop it.
The text warns about a specific diagnostic trap here involving the appendix.
This is the pseudoappendicitis. Yersinia infects the mesenteric lymph nodes right next to the appendix. It causes severe right lower quadrant pain.
So the surgeon opens them up.
And the appendix looks perfectly fine, but the lymph nodes are angry and swollen. It mimics appendicitis perfectly. It's a classic misdiagnosis trap.
Finally, let's group the hospital bugs. The other Enterobacteriaceae, Klebsiella, Proteus, Escherichia, these are opportunistic, right?
They prey on the weakened. Klebsiella pneumonia is famous for causing pneumonia in alcoholics or diabetics.
Why them specifically?
People with compromised aspiration reflexes. It has this massive, thick capsule that makes it slimy and hard for phagocytes to eat. Patients cough up current jelly sputum.
Wait a minute. Shigella had current jelly stool, and Klebsiella has current jelly sputum.
Yes. Medical history loves its food analogies. Just remember, stool equals Shigella, sputum equals Klebsiella.
Okay, and Proteus.
Proteus is the kidney stone factory. It produces urease just like H. pylori, but in the bladder. This raises the urine pH, making it alkaline.
Which causes things to precipitate.
Exactly. Magnesium and calcium precipitate out into strulite stones. They're often called staghorn calculi because they can grow to fill up the whole renal pelvis, looking like antlers on an X-ray.
Ouch. And Serratia.
Serratia marcescens. It produces a bright red pigment. It loves damp environments. You might even see it as pink slime in your shower. In the hospital, it causes respiratory and urinary infections.
Okay, we've covered a massive amount of ground. Let's try to distill this into a rapid-fire, last-minute lecture recap.
Let's do it.
I'll throw the bug. You give the high-yield hook. Ready? E. coli 0157.H7.
Bloody diarrhea, no fever, Shigella-like toxin, risk of HUS. Do not give antibiotics.
Salmonella typhi.
Systemic infection, rose spots on the trunk, gallbladder carrier state,
Shigella.
ultra-low infectious dose, like 10 bugs, actin rockets for motility, bloody dysentery,
Vibrio cholerae.
contaminated water, toxin permanently activates G proteins, rice water stool, hydration is key,
Helicobacter pylori.
urease positive causes ulcers and gastric cancer, triple therapy treatment.
And the big takeaway for the listener.
Don't just memorize the names, look at the mechanism. If you understand how the toxin works, whether it's AMP causing fluid loss or Shiga toxin killing cells, you can predict the symptoms and you can figure out the treatment. The mechanism is the map.
That's great advice.
Also, use the summary tables in the chapter figures 12.5 and 12.7 to review antibiotic choices. Because while fluid is key, knowing when to prescribe Cipro or ceftriaxone really matters.
A huge thank you to everyone listening to this deep dive into Lippincott's microbiology. We really hope this helps you ace that exam or catch that diagnosis on the wards.
Absolutely.
Before we go, here's a thought to chew on. We talk about how E. coli is mostly harmless until it picks up a plasmid. In a hospital environment where we use tons of antibiotics, we're essentially forcing these bacteria to trade secrets. We're selecting for the ones that share resistance genes. If a harmless gut bug can turn into a kidney-destroying killer with one genetic swap, are we just one bad plasmid transfer away from a super pathogen that we can't treat?
That keeps me up at night.
On that cheerful note, see you next time.